Tuesday, actually.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, well, but that. No big deal. That's not true at all. I would say, pick one you think you may not be right about that, but I think that's what you think. You go more confident than you think people are. Work out very
I like it that way. This is good. Good one. Good one and good routine, but they're so short.
I was just saying, this is
Why? That's fine. It's faster than you. It's chilly. I like it. I wish it was colder.
I need to stop.
Yeah, it is because. You like the spirit,
So, slap.
Huh? I think Tom will determine that.
Yeah, add the bow to the whole.
Well, we'll see.
I'll be the.
I read, I
Yeah.
started printing out,
My face.
Bill on the Highways, and then I read it like on paper for the first time. I was very.
It's good when that happens, right?
Yeah, it was very strange. I was like, I thought it was so good until I put it on paper and it was awful. And then when you start,
How are you?
I'll add yeah, we're live streaming it
Is it
and
stay
recording it.
when we're done? Is it like still on when we're done, or is it?
I don't know if it will still be on YouTube, but I think they're recording.
Cut the camera, gotta.
Let me know.
Why is there an upward trim when Melissa starts performing? Well, flash is just gone.
You walk up on stage and just keep walking off. You want to go there and talk about this?
Yeah.
Wearing my mask. I'm like, thank you.
This is part of the performance, like, I'm gonna face away from everybody.
Just turn around and face, yeah.
I'll put my sunglasses on, like.
I have a broad
my
body in my
artistic
car.
Yeah, there you go, there you go.
My boyfriend was very
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But then, the long arm, I look at it and I wear it, if you see it, and I wear a mask. Nobody knows me. And I don't feel like this when you're like, say Bob has some movement. Or you're like, I actually can't where he like, he has the legs on his mask. He's like, and the legs are shake when he laughs. Maybe that would be my speech. I would never be like, okay, thank you. Everybody's like, it's a fun part.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm getting the character.
This piece is called.
He's got like a series of sounds. And
I would do that too.
yeah,
I wish I would have thought about that.
Even the
I
stand.
just typed it with the sound.
With that. And then he gave it on stage.
That's all.
Oh,
Yeah, I want to
that would
make
have been
sure.
so fun.
I'm gonna come to the doctor.
You're like, all right, James is done. Pass it down along.
Live on stage and be like, I'm sorry.
I was just want a mic check, that's all. A mic check, 1, 2.
Start sobbing out the over.
Look at there.
Oh, across the. Oh, you get her off the stage.
Yeah, they get really close, yeah, see, they get really close to it.
You just really see my child. Oh, so you have to put it right up to your mouth or something here.
I was like, I mean, you can hold it like
You're
here.
kind of talk.
Yeah.
There was a
Just
woman
don't spit in my
in my high school, and she would yell at the microphone, but she'd have to get close, but she'd yell, she was like, "Oh, so loud." She'd be like, "How?"
Here's
Is this on? Yeah, I think it's on.
And she'd be like, "Yeah." That's just her.
yeah.
He was,
She was really the class. I know. Your sister? Oh, Abby? Yeah. You look so much
Make sure you have backup battery.
I'm literally in the chair. I'm gonna walk up and be like,
You should really have this one with them.
and I'll be like,
Oh, what?
Hair off. Here you go.
hours.
How
you doing?
We can all boo you off stage before you start reading.
Start throwing tomatoes in.
Just as soon as you walk up there and start.
Okay, I'll stop.
If you insist.
I want to take Sorry.
Great job. You get the however terrible god awful for that. Really good.
He gets 49.
You're letting know if there was a lot of boys.
Have you ever had anyone pass out?
Platypus?
No.
Yes.
Nope.
Are we gonna do a
I'm
collective,
just kidding.
like,
Just kill it. No one's gonna pass.
and do a flyer, or just goes
Fine.
red, yellow, the voice one?
There was that-
Good one.
Girl, that's not late.
No, I'm just.
That's just from vocal warm.
Yeah. 4 years of Arnold flyer. The same me being flyer.
I'm surprised that was you thought it was running.
Yeah, she said she wanted to come get something.
Yeah. Just infinite running pictures on Instagram. I ran 50K today. All right, well, the rest of us mortals, I have coffee. Right?
Thought about it now. Yeah.
There's a lot of movement at the bottom. I can remember the bottom of the face mask.
5. All right. 5?
These are people saying why. I thought someone
Well,
was
like retention. Yeah, 5, I don't want to do it. What if we all,
I'm putting a fill
what
over.
if we all collectively just got up and just left? Reschedule.
Maybe that'd be concerned.
You'd be like, what?
We planned it ahead of time.
No.
Yeah, let's go.
Everything was kind of.
Buffalo wings. They have their new crumb flavor size. I'm so excited. Spicy wings and peppermint mocha. Yes.
That makes my tummy upset. That makes me uncomfortable.
We have spicy wings. We have like chili. Like,
Okay, is the mic on? Can everybody hear me? Excellent, sounds like it's on. Good. Well, hello. I know almost everybody in the room, but my name is Tom Irish. I teach creative writing here at Sauk Valley Community College. I was thinking about this event today before we came here, and I was thinking about how good it was going to feel to be back in the theater. And I'm right. I don't know about you guys, but it's been like 2 years since I've been in here, and it feels really good to be doing an actual live event, right, where we get to be together in the room and stuff. So I was really excited about that. But then I also started thinking about the theater and all the stuff that's happened here too, which, like, I think a lot of you guys don't know a lot of the background. Like, this theater is the Mathis Theater, named after Jerry Mathis, who was a founding faculty member at Sauk. He taught English and he taught theater, and he did lots of great theater performances and stuff in here, but he also specialized in the performance of literature. And so he did a lot of the kind of thing, he taught it and had performances like we're going to do tonight. So it's cool that we can kind of bring that back. And I was thinking about all the other things we've done, the open mics, the fine arts performance hours, the plays, the student film contest. And I was thinking a lot about how cool it is to do that sort of cross-curricular stuff where, you know, creative writing students get to come in and have the experience of performing, and art students gets to make a movie that they show that has movement in it that they don't usually get to do. And we've done a lot of really cool things like that at Sauk, and I think that this is, you know, going to be a really good example of that, this event that we're doing right now. We have the creative writing students are going to be reading for us a little bit later, but before them, we have a featured speaker from Northern Illinois University. Dan Klefstad is the host and newscaster of WNIJ, which is Northern Illinois University's public radio station in the morning. And he's also the content director, but he's here to talk about his new novel. He has several novels out. The one that's out now, the most recent one, is called Fiona's Guardians. And Fiona's Guardians has recently been, part of it has been adapted into a podcast, which is by the Artists Ensemble Theater, and it's the Mystery Journey podcast. So if anybody has a commute and you're interested in podcasts, I'd say check it out. It was, what, 25 minutes, something like that, the one that I saw, right? So give Dan Klefstad a round of applause, and he's got some.
Well, thank you, Tom. Nice to see all of you here. Let me just set my stuff here real quick. Okay, a little water. All right. And it's really, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. It's fantastic to be invited here. And I was thinking about how I would address live readings and also literature and its intersection with live performance, which I think is something that you've been teaching here and part of what this event is about. So thrilled about that. The podcast, if you are on Spotify or Podbean or wherever you get your podcasts, is called Mysterious Journey, and Fiona's Guardians is the excerpt you'll find there. It's free. It's 23 minutes of your life. Professional actors have performed it, and it was adapted by a playwright named Margaret Rather, one of the co-founders of our Artists Ensemble Theater. And it was a revelation hearing my words being read by professional actors. And I hope you have this chance. When you have a book of poems, a novel, a memoir that you finally have ready to publish and do publish it, look around in your community for a theater, playwrights and actors who might be willing to adapt it. It's worth asking the question. That's what I did, or actually a friend of mine connected me, but it was worth every minute of the negotiations, the talking, the reading their script adaptation. When you hear actors reading your words, it'll change how you write. For example, when an actor is reading my characters, I found it amazing how just by changing their inflections, or maybe emphasizing a certain word or even syllable, got me thinking differently about the character. Or when the actor decides that they make a choice about the type of personality they're going to give, or the voice that they're going to give to a character, that changed my thinking as well. They taught me more about my characters than I realized. So I made a vow never again to write in silence after hearing this podcast. It really makes a difference if you are writing through a character, and it could be a nonfiction character as well. You're writing through a person and you're giving them lines, you're giving them words. say those words out loud. It will make a difference in how you develop the character as well. It's a little akin, I guess, to method acting, of what little I actually know about that. But it really, it'll open my eyes, and I think it may open yours as well. So the podcast is adapted from a novel that came out just last year. It's a vampire novel, the first time I've ever written anything horror. And it's more gothic than bloody or jump scary or anything like that. But it is definitely a story about people and their relationships with a monster. The monster, of course, is a 250-year-old vampire named Fiona. And the guardians in Fiona's Guardians are humans who fetch blood for her, or find people in hospitals who steal a little bit of blood. Because Fiona needs 10 pints of human blood every night to survive. And she just prefers O negative. And so these people, these humans go in to the hospitals, they buy a little bit of blood that's been stolen here and there, and it gets expensive. There's a big sort of operation that is a financial operation that is designed to keep Fiona alive. And that's really how she describes the business that she's in. I am in the business of surviving, she tells one of the people who interviews for a job with her to become one of her guardians. So what I have here is I'm going to read a little excerpt, and this is most of the book is actually told from the point of view of the human guardians, but Fiona does address the reader directly on a handful of occasions, and this includes right at the beginning of the book. Hello, mortal. I'm touched by your interest in those who work for me and those who used to. A handful truly deserve to be remembered in a book that never goes out of print. Their loyalty and talent are the reason I've existed for 2.5 centuries. A few, however, earned the painful and premature deaths detailed in these pages. For me, loyalty comes first and must be constant. That's not to say that a partnership with me can't end in mutual agreement. It just never happened before. Still, I may allow my current guardian to retire. After serving longer than any other, he might well live his remaining years in a manner of his choosing. This would create an opportunity for another to earn his substantial salary and benefits. But a warning is in order. The work is as relentless and unsparing as my hunger, and everyone I employ has murdered at least once on my behalf. Not that this is the preferred option. There are other, less extreme ways to obtain blood for me, and Daniel built a robust network that could be handed off to a successor. He's in the car now, looking at his watch, wondering when we can go home to his decanter of scotch. From what I see, nothing in your cabinet would satisfy him, so rest assured, I won't leave with any of your bottles. I see you've been reading job postings. Do not ask if I offer a retirement plan. In truth, I've never understood the concept. Each evening I awake knowing I'm the chief executive for extending my life, so ceasing work would amount to suicide. But this is what Daniel wants, and I owe him for that time he saved me from dying. It's in the book. My favorite characters feature Agrippina, the one who created me. Driven by hunger, she brought me to the edge of death, but changed her mind when I started turning blue. She claimed she saw something worth preserving, a simple, unselfish nature that disappeared the moment she opened a vein for me. Since that moment, the only feeling I've known, besides adoration for her, is a craving that never ceases. That is, until the instant I tasted regret, the perpetual pain of guilt at not being with her when our enemies reappeared. They're in here too. And so is my revenge. Go ahead, indulge your curiosity. When you finish reading, I'll visit again and make myself visible. You'll find me sitting in that chair over there, and we can talk about your future. Until then. And that's the opening chapter of Fiona's Guardians. Not as good as the actors from Artists Ensemble Theater. They're much better than I am, but I did rehearse it a few times. She mentioned some enemies. Every good story has an antagonist. And Fiona's Guardians has an antagonist, a group of monks, I guess I'd say, Catholic monks, an ancient secret order that not even the Pope knows about, who have the sole job of exterminating vampires. That is their holy mission, if you will. And so the vampires defeated them in 1900, and Fiona was among the combatants. And then suddenly they're back again. And they, this is not much of a spoiler because it happens fairly quickly in the book. They destroy Fiona's sire, Agrippina, who she referred to in the opening there. And this begins a new war, and it's really a war in which the monks are now deploying technology. They're flying drones with thermal imagers that could detect the below freezing vampires, and then the monks will come in during the daytime when the vampire's asleep and kill them. They're also using wooden-tipped bullets instead of just stakes to kill them. So we have a lot of dramatic tension that comes from that in the book. And don't take my word for it. The reviews have been very, very encouraging, including a very nice one from the Chicago Writers Association. So if you're ever looking for a Gothic, I'd say a modern Gothic vampire tale, this might be something you'd want to consider. So I could talk all day about my book or my writing or the theater or my writing and my broadcasting for WNIJ, which does involve a lot of writing, by the way. But really, I'd love to just hear some of your questions if you have any. I'd love to just take any of your questions. Go ahead.
So I've been following a writer, Richard Lange, out of Los Angeles, and he's kind of this hard-edged crime writer, but his latest novel is also about vampires, called The Rovers.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, why vampires?
Yeah, that's okay. For me, speaking just for myself, I was always interested in monsters as a kid, even when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons during the 1980s, and vampires were in the monster manual that they had as part of that whole game. But just watching Bela Lugosi on screen or Christopher Lee, those vampire films, the Hammer Dracula films, I got the sense right away, if you just take them on the simple level as mythical creatures, they are always portrayed as stronger than we humans are, sexier than we are, and they just go on living until something catastrophic happens. And as a kid, I thought, who wouldn't want to have those qualities, right? But later on, as I got through high school, started reading more in college, I began to think of them. I began to understand vampires a little more as perfect metaphors for the things that drain our energy. It could be a friend or a family member. It doesn't even have to be a person. It could be a corporate or government entity that maybe through corruption is stealing a little bit of your money, just enough every month so you don't notice, and prompting you to ask yourself, why do I feel poorer this week? And so they're just an unending, as far as I can tell, use for vampires in literature. And I found I'm only just kind of breaking the surface, with it. I feel like I can go even deeper with the next book, which I intend to be a sequel to this one. Go ahead.
Are there writers or stories that you go back to year after year?
Year after year. I do go back to Stoker's Dracula from time to time. I do read the Anne Rice novels again occasionally. By that I mean the classics that her first few books, in particular, The Interview with the Vampire and The Vampire Lestat, to what I consider to be modern classics of Gothic literature. Other than that, I spend a lot of time reading. I go back to some of the Albert Camus that I read during college. But I kind of just float all over the place. There's not any particular writer that I go back to that often. I'm always kind of looking for the next thing because I'm looking for ideas, new ideas, fresh ideas about, if I'm stuck in my own writing, what exciting new writer out there, for example, a writer out in LA who used to write crime and now is writing about vampires, I'm gonna go find that person and start reading them. Because I am constantly looking for ideas. I need input after spending all this time writing. And I don't know what, once all those ideas marinate for a while, I don't know what will come back out, but I am always looking for fresh and new as much as possible.
So you talked a bit about perceiving dialogue a little bit differently after you've heard actors, actually speaking the lines and whatnot. So I'm curious about, since you have quite a bit of experience overall, your overall process on writing dialogue to make it feel real and make it feel like it's not rehearsed, it's not someone reading from a script. Make it feel like 2 or 3 people really interacting with each other.
Yeah, I find that there's a fine balance that you want to think about when writing dialogue between 2 people. And that is, you don't want to make it too real. When we're speaking extemporaneously, there'll be uhs, there'll be likes, there'll be a lot of words that we don't mean sometimes. So that's the artifice comes in actually making it sound real, or at least look real on the page, when in fact a lot of editing has gone in to make that dialogue look quote unquote real. The revisions on dialogue especially, and I find, well, I have a reflex that goes, kill as many words as possible that don't belong there. And I'm scanning every sentence. This is what I do every morning during morning edition when I'm looking at news copy. I am looking for words that don't belong. And I'm just cut them. Just mowing through words, leaving them on the floor. And then I look at, again, what I have. And I'm usually pretty satisfied with it, unless I can tell sometimes if I over edit. And that's fine. Put a word back. But don't just, but it's better to put them back in than just leave them all in there. And, this long sentence where the reader is going to get bored very quickly. You have to constantly think about your reader when you are writing. At what point are you getting bored? And and then think about how they might feel. But yeah, dialogue is something that I love writing. I actually prefer writing dialogue, which I suppose made this book easier to adapt from a playwright's standpoint. Because of course in theater it's all action and dialogue, with the occasional soliloquy. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about like the planning process. Like I've tried a novel a couple times and never had any luck on it. I'm really interested in that, like sort of pre-writing, like what do you do before you start writing? How much do you know, etc., before you begin a novel?
Yeah, usually writers will describe themselves as in one of two camps. You're either a plotter or an outliner, or a pantser, has anybody heard that phrase? Yeah, where you write literally writing, figuratively writing by the seat of your pants. And I have been, up to this moment, a pantser. I am trying to outline the next book because I don't want to take another 4 years to write a novel. But I do, in defense of the pantser, I'll give you a defense of the pantser. If you're not in a hurry to publish, if you don't have a contract that says your next book must come out next year, you can take time to let ideas steep and then build on those ideas over time and give the characters more flesh. Take time to really flesh out your characters, and a plot will emerge because the characters are going to drive the plot. And really, a good place to start is kind of like a play. You have just put if you're wondering how to start a book, just put 2 people in a room. One person has something the other wants, and therefore has power that the other person wants. And you can do all sorts of things with it, but it begins with dialogue. There may be some action, and then soon as the characters are discussing whatever predicament they're in, the one who doesn't have the power is going to try to maneuver to get something, get the thing that they want, that they lack. And there's the dramatic tension right there. And so I find that that's a great way to start a story going, develop characters very quickly, and then push the plot. And I would encourage you to experiment with that, if you haven't already.
Don't mind another question.
Yeah.
What's the best way to approach writing irrational characters? Characters who act suddenly and without thoughts, and not always, they don't make the best decisions. Because when I write characters, it's hard for me to get in the headspace of someone who just doesn't think about what they're doing. So I don't often write those type of characters, but I want to. Mm-hmm. What's the best way to approach doing that?
Well, I might suggest finding one rational trait. Every irrational person, or seemingly irrational person, has some rational aspect of them, some quality that makes sense to an outsider. And so find that one thing that is rational about them. And then you could kind of isolate that, or even build that, build the character around that, but also, because the irrationality is how they're perceived. I mean, they may actually be just crazy and irrational, but really it comes down to perception. And so if you start with the one thing that makes sense to your character and is objectively makes sense when you understand it, that kind of can help provide a roadmap to where that character might go. And of course, the irrational stuff is going to come out. I don't know what's. Give me tell me a little bit about the character that you're developing and his or her irrational traits.
So two characters who are on some sort of quest. They're both approaching some sort of end goal, and both of them are supporting each other as the goal. But my idea initially was to have one betray the other, mm-hmm. and there was reasonable reason within the story that I already prepared. But when it came down to it, I didn't feel like there was enough reasoning for it to make sense for the character to act irrationally in this situation, mm-hmm. because of the preparation that had already led up to that point. So I was unsure on how to make it make sense if the character suddenly is like, you know what, I'm going to do this thing over here and not take the rational path.
I'm trying to think of the one rational thing I could think of is desire, mm-hmm. sexual attraction, love.
Right.
So that maybe this is a person who is otherwise irrational falls in love with someone and is going to take away someone's beloved, if you will. That is one thing that makes sense. We all know it's going to create all sorts of tension, right. Which is great. You might consider that, or something else, but it has to be something that is, I think, relatable. I think that's the key word I'm trying to get to here. We're all a little bit irrational. So if you were able to get me to look at my own irrationalities, whatever they may be, that I think is a strong connection you can make with your reader. It'll involve some experimentation, but I wish you all the best with that. Any other questions? I'm here all, go ahead. Yeah.
You kind of mentioned that 4 years that it took you to write this.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a process where you discipline to write every day, or how?
No.
Or is it just kind of whenever you have time?
Yeah, or the inspiration.
Yeah,
I mean, I have a day job, obviously, and I get to work at 4 in the morning, so I'm pretty much knocked out by 9 o'clock when my shift ends. So, after cooking a little bit of food, resting, I can sometimes write a little bit during the day, but really it's going to be on the weekends, or better yet, if I take a week off, I'll be able to write probably starting in the middle of the next week that I have off. And then, I'll choose something simple, is a short story that I may want to turn into a chapter into a future book. So obviously a short story has to be self-contained. So that I'll start with that. My sweet spot is 2,300 words. Most of my chapters in my book will be that way. be that long. And of course, most of my short stories that I've written are about that length. And I can knock that out in 2 days, including revisions and editing, and have something that I can take to a publisher. But I need to unspool for a few days after leaving work on my vacation. So that's my routine. I wish I could, if I ever retire and can write full time, I'm curious to see what will happen. Will I actually be more productive? I don't know.
I've been an avid listener of NPR for years. What is the writing process like for you on NPR? You alluded to that earlier.
Mm-hmm.
What does your writing look like for NPR?
Sure. So I show up at 4, make some coffee, and then by 4:30, I'll call my producer, who's at home. She and I, Claire Buchanan, and I will have a conversation. There's a shared document that she will send me, and that is all of our newscasts for the entire show. And I'll go through it with her. I will read aloud, which is good because then I can hear how it's going to sound. And I'll also be able to spot things that don't sound right, or if a sentence is going on too long and I'm going to run out of breath. The idea with writing broadcast copy, I don't know if you've ever heard this, TV or radio, is that you're writing for the ear. And so you have to be really efficient. The best sentence structure is pretty simple: subject, verb, object. You don't want long dependent clauses that start with in the 2016 Republican presidential primary debate in Charlotte, North Carolina, comma. You're already losing your listener, who is probably multitasking while they're listening. Nobody listens just like there's a speaker. I'm just going to focus entirely on that. And so what we'll do is we'll try to get the sentences as lean as possible. Not only easier for me to say, but easier for you to hear them while you're fixing breakfast. You can maybe get the dog needs to go out, or whatever you're doing at home. I'm not the sole focus of your attention. I know that. So how do I get your attention? I'll go through the script with Claire, and we'll start knocking out words that don't belong there. And there are a lot in any story that comes to me. Doesn't mean the story's badly written. It's just that it might not be perfect for a newscast. So I have to get it to that point. And so by the time we'll spend a half hour on 4 newscasts. And then by the time I get the broadcast copy the way I want it, it's just about 5 o'clock. I go on, and there may be further revisions, probably will be further revisions after I go on and try that first newscast at 5:04. I might say, you know what, we can tighten this up a little bit here, that sort of thing. So it's really getting down to, we call it write tight in radio. And I highly recommend you try it as an exercise. Write broadcast copy and send it to somebody. Anybody who works in radio or TV? Yes.
So we have a student newspaper. I was going to ask you about that as well, because I'm the advisor for that, and I'm always kind of thinking about the connections between the two things, creative writing and journalism. And I've had creative writing students take the journalism class and even say, this is not for me, but I'm better because I took the class. Anything you have to say about the connection between those things?
Well, think about Ernest Hemingway. He was a newspaper writer. And so he was used to fitting in, like I'm fitting words into a 2.5-minute cast. Hemingway and other writers of their time who were journalists were trying to fit into their words into column inches. Now with digital, I don't know if the same discipline needs to be there, because an article can go on. But at the same time, you're thinking, when is the reader going to get bored? How do you keep them hooked and want them to stay for the next paragraph or even just the next sentence? That is up to you to make it interesting. And I go by the maxim from broadcast scout and talent coach Valerie Geller: tell the truth, make it matter, and never be boring. So when you were writing a news article, if you're writing a poem, a haiku, if you're writing a 6-word short story, or if you're writing a novel or a memoir, try to make sure that the next sentence you write is a really good sentence that's going to hook people. Find that hook that's going to keep people turning the page, getting deeper and deeper into your story. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Have I? Okay, I wandered around a bit, but yes. I do that. Go ahead.
So you're a broadcaster, you're a fiction writer. What is your background and what led you to having these multiple abilities?
Well, they're all pretty much centered on writing. Most of what I say on the air is written. Even if it's just I'm teasing a story that's coming up later, then I'll have the bullet pointed at the very least. So everything involves the words, the written words that I'm either going to put into a manuscript or out there on the radio. But I've always been kind of both. I started writing my first novel when I was 16, and it was a spy novel that was based loosely on a show starring Sam Neill back in the early 80s called Riley, Ace of Spies. Anybody hear of it? It doesn't hold up. I love Sam Neill, but this show doesn't hold up. It was on public television for a while, British series that was on public TV. And so based on this story about an actual spy, a British spy named Sidney Riley, I decided to write my own spy novel. Okay, I'm 16, and I think I know the world, right? And I wrote 200 pages of typed manuscript back then. And, I showed it to my mother, and I could tell she wasn't thrilled. It needed work. She said, but she encouraged me to go on and say, change the ending here. I think you've got a story here, but you just need to work on it. And that's my first lesson in revisions, how important revisions are and how necessary they are and how much a matter of life they are for a writer in any genre that you write or medium. And that love scene, Daniel, revise that. Other things like that. So I don't even know where that manuscript is anymore. It was terrible. But then I went to college and I studied journalism. I studied history, which I call a form of journalism, just back a century or two. I remember one of the professors at NIU at the time was a real stickler for writing. He was a history writer. He was a cultural historian. His name was Stephen Kern. He's no longer there. I think he went to Ohio, somewhere in Ohio. And he was a guy who really could grab you with his words. I really loved reading his books, and The Culture of Time and Space is one that I thought was outstanding writing. I mean, if you read a lot of history books, not all of them are, they may be telling you a really great story, but not all of those books have the writing craft front and center. It's more about telling you a much more epic story, for example, about an important event in history. But just relating to the reader, yes, you have to get your facts out there, and yes, you have to support your facts with evidence, but there are ways to do both, to grab the reader by the collar and make them want to continue reading, while also telling a very important story bolstered by facts that you dug up in an archive, for example. So I learned all these lessons, and obviously coming to an NPR station, having the knowledge of how important facts and being able to show you the evidence, at least tell you the evidence of what's important in a story, but also to make it interesting. I kind of learned that while in college. It sort of all came together. And then I started working after college in the newsroom at W9J. So I started out as a music host, oddly enough, jazz and then blues and then news. So that's my story. It's been 24 years since I hosted Morning Edition, I believe. So
you started with a little bit of passion there, a little bit of education, mixed it together.
Yeah, pretty much.
Way through it.
Yeah, and the guy who lit that fire in me about writing happened to be a historian, a cultural historian, somebody who used as documents of history, music, architecture, examples of paintings, art, visual art, philosophy, novels of the time, and his specialty was 1880 to right around World War I. And so using all of these things I just mentioned to document change. And that in itself was kind of mind-blowing to me. I thought, wow, this is what college is really like. You're learning really exciting things that you never knew was possible. And so this teacher, Stephen Kern, he really kind of opened my mind up about a lot of things, and the words, how to use the words on the page, was front and center. Yeah. Anybody else?
I just have one quick one. I read over recent break George Saunders' Swim in the Pond in the Rain, and he breaks down these Russian short stories that he teaches at Syracuse. And I'm wondering about your choice to go with novels as opposed to short stories. I'm a really big fan of Joyce Carol Oates' short stories. I think they're just amazing. But I'm not such a huge fan of her novels. And so, you know, I'm kind of inclined, if I'm going to create something, to stick with a short story because it's right there, it can all be pulled together, and the novel seems like a Herculean task.
It is, at first. You know, the way that I think about it is, of course, I love writing short stories. I love reading short stories. You know, it's something you can read on a subway commute or on a, you know, a short flight or whatever. They're perfect for that. But they're also concise, and I love concision. I love being able to tell a story in 2,200 words. I've told a story, my shortest story was 435 words, a bit of flash fiction. I absolutely love reducing words, but still being able to tell a short story. I'm reminded that one of the most powerful stories is a 6-word story that Hemingway, I think, was challenged to write. I forget by whom. Do you all know the story of the 6-word, you know, story that Hemingway wrote? It's an incredibly powerful story that has a beginning and a middle and an end. 6 words. I love that. I'd say a good several of the chapters of my book started out as short stories. And I would encourage you, if you're writing fiction, so I'm speaking just to the fiction folks right now, okay? If you are thinking about writing a novel, start out by taking one of the early chapters in your book and write it as a short story. This will do a couple of things. It'll obviously you'll lean down that story. It'll give you confidence as a writer, because if you get it published by a journal, by a genre magazine, a webzine, whatever, that tells you that you're doing something right, that this story has legs. But it also helps you build an audience. People will begin to recognize you and say, "Oh, this person, I know them. I'm going to start reading more of their stuff." And so that helps you, I think, as a career. So short stories are a really good way to build, I think, a career, a platform as a writer. But I also happen to just love reading them. And one of the best short story writers I know lives in not too far from here in Oregon. Anybody ever heard of Molly McNett? She's a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. She had a book of short stories in 2008, I think, called One Dog Happy. But in 2014, she got one of her stories, La Pulcra Nota, or The Perfect Note, in the 2014 American Short Story collection. She was a Best of American Short Story writer. And her story, La Pulcra Nota, it's about a medieval or early Renaissance English music teacher who falls in love. It's a fantastic story. I highly recommend that you find it. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So that's my spiel about short stories. Read them, write them, love them.
Do you remember Hemingway's 6 words?
I do. I mean, it's unbelievable. Yeah, it's hard to forget. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. That's like one of the most powerful stories out there. And took 6 words. Pretty amazing. That story right there is a master class in how to write tight and write.
He always started writing the second half of the story.
Sorry, what was that?
He always seemed to, his novels were always the second half of the story.
Yeah.
I don't know, I just felt like, you know, the story is this long and he started it here, and part of your task is to fill in the first half of the story as you read it.
Yeah, there's some character development. We're trying to figure out who these people are, where are we, you know, the culture.
They're always, the characters are always so complex, and then, you know, he never told you why they were straight up, but
Yeah.
you just try to piece it together as you read the second act of the story.
And that's important for the reader, I think. You know, we want some discovery. We don't want to be just spoon-fed everything. We want to discover things ourselves about a character or about where's the story going or about the culture we're set in. And I think that as a writer, it's just such a great reminder of, you know, constantly keeping your reader in mind. With working in radio, we're very audience focused. I mean, that literally we have mugs in our coffee mugs that say, as you're about to, you see the words "think audience" as you're about to just drink your coffee. That's the last thing you see before you take a sip of coffee. Think audience. You know, most of my colleagues, you know, throughout the public radio system are super audience focused. That's all they think about, or that's at least that's that I can tell is all that they think about. How to serve their audience, how to reach new audiences, how to you get people to listen more and more and more. So yeah, and also thinking about the mission. You know, what are we doing? What are we trying to serve? You know, how are we trying to serve the community? That sort of thing. It's a small but mighty crowd. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I'm going to pause for some water. Get thirsty, Tom. If we have exhausted the questions, I'd be happy to hear your stories if we're ready to move on to the next part, and then we can always talk more after that.
I think let's go ahead and do that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Got my notebook too. I'll take notes. All right. Thank you.
All right, well, I'm not going to talk long here. I was just going to say, next we have the creative writing students from the Creative Writing 1 class who've all put together something that they wrote. They're all going to each do a short reading. I think we have about 8 here tonight. So I think we'll start with James Hutchison. James, you want to go first?
If you insist.
All right. Did you learn about the irrational character?
No, not.
Okay, yeah.
All right, this is the prologue of a work in progress called Ghosts of Andromeda. Castiel stands on the bridge leaning over the main combat information center console. The bridge crew of the Albatross sits suited up in airtight combat suits. The deathly quiet is only occasionally interrupted by the sounds of the air ventilation system humming almost imperceptibly in the background. With little more warning than the display of the CIC blasting with visual data, the silence lists as a burst of chatter emanates from astrographics. The target has arrived, says a deck officer with a tinge of anticipation in his voice. Castiel simply nods. 2 heavy cruisers by the look of their graph signatures, old and slow Triumph-class boats, and there's a slight pause as he waits to confirm the data. They're not singing IFS. Assuming intel is correct, that would be our catch, says Castiel with a stern but satisfied expression. Have they seen us? Aye, sir, answers a different deck officer. Sensors show an acceleration of 2390 Gs and holding current trajectory on an intercept course. ETA 10 minutes until contact. Good. Comms, send out the pre-recorded SOS and make it sloppy. Donnelly, how's that radiation bleed? Captain, to them we look like a wallowing 120 megaton hauler with blown grav node and leaking reactor vent, replies First Lieutenant William Donnelly in a thick, slow-paced Parisian accent. Satisfied, Castiel steps down from his perch above the CIC and walks to his command seat, locks himself in place, and then gives the command, check seal. And all at once the bridge echoes with clicks of a dozen helmets locking into place. Bring us about to a heading of 1929, rate acceleration at 1215 Gs, and put a little wiggle in there to confirm their suspicions that we may have a bad node, orders Captain Abbasi Abu Bakr Castiel. Aye, aye, echoes the bridge in response. Incoming hail, Captain, says First Lieutenant Tormund Rice. There's a pause as Rice listens to the message. They're demanding we heave to, cut drives, and prepare to be boarded. Well, I don't feel like being boarded today, replies Castiel humorlessly. Send our canned response. Aye, sir. Aboard the first Triumph-class vessel on a well-lit bridge, it stinks of cigarette smoke A wiry man with sandy hair slaps the deck servant across the face with the back of his hand. I said, don't look me in the eye, slave, yells the man. Yes, Captain, stammers the older man while reeling from the strike. Captain Sheik watches the dirty data screen as the slow, fat hauler limps through space when suddenly a thin, brown-haired woman with a standard merchant marine uniform appears on the screen. We're a legal merchant vessel authorized to operate in this region. You have no authority to command. We submit to boarding. They're sending out a distress signal, Captain, says the nearby deckhand. Captain Sheik scoffs loudly and replies to the woman on the screen. There's no one out here to save you, then drinks deeply from a whiskey glass. Hey, Cap, you think we should suit up? Asks the deckhand. Nah, this will be over before lunch. On the second Triumph ship, Captain Ivan Golgor sits quietly watching and waiting. There's no joyous rabble here and no unprofessional conduct on his bridge. Ivan is ex-Navy and demands at least a modicum of proficiency from his crew, which of course means that his crew party's far hardier than the other ships in the Iron Raiders. The captured slaves would be able to attest to that. Ivan and his crew, except for crows at any rate, would use the slaves as they saw fit, taking what they wanted and selling what was left. Crows didn't seem to enjoy the more pleasurable aspects of being a pirate, and had been caught sneaking rations to the slaves and even been spied talking to them. The man had been reprimanded once already, beaten, and even threatened to be spaced Dutchman style, but it just wouldn't stop. Ivan considered Crows a dangerous sort of asshole, with a heart that gets you killed or worse betrayed, out here on the other side of the wall. A flash order came over comms from his sister ship, fire a warning shot across the fucker's bow. That should get them to heave to. Weapons contact, Captain, yells First Lieutenant Louis Guns Gunnery. 2 birds on a trajectory across our bow. Castell simply nodded, knowing his crew have full confidence that he's absorbing their information without verbal confirmation. A few minutes passed before a second launch is announced, then a third. This one's a little close, yells Guns. Vibrations travel down the length of the ship as the blast wave of a 15 megaton warhead impacts the Albatross forward barriers. Captain, I've activated the second stage, says Guns with a signature Casman drawl. We've slowed by a quarter. It seems our blown grav node just knocked offline for good, he finishes with a grin. Right on schedule then. Have they detected the mine array? Doesn't seem like it, Captain. Castile palms his mechanical pocket watch and checks the time. It wasn't quite as accurate as the ship's chronographs, but it was accurate enough to tell all 3 ships entering stage 3 of this trap. 30 seconds. Stage 3, stand by. Check deploy barrage, orders Castile. Check, answers Guns. Launch stationary barrages. Prepare for a flip and burn. Captain, I'm getting some odd readings up ahead, says an astrograver aboard Ivan Kogar's ship, the Numina. From the hauler? No, sir, she says, and pauses to bring up a 3-dimensional holograph of the anomaly. These here, I've only just picked it up. Looks like a debris field. Ivan leans forward in concentration and finds himself pulling on his ex-Navy experience with Imperial weapons, tech, and tactics. You can see about 45 pieces of debris, but it doesn't seem to be scattered randomly. And in the center of this field lie 2 large objects. 2 large central objects, says Ivan to himself as he analyzes the image. Center of the field, smaller objects stacked vertically above and below at 5-click intervals. Mines, exclaims Ivan. The bastard is, but he trails off as he runs for his command console. She, yells Ivan into the mic. There's a wall of fucking mines between us and that hauler. The fuck you on about, Golgor, answers the unfazed captain with the harvester. Cut our speed by half, orders Ivan to his crew. Drop us behind the harvester. Aye, yells the deck officer. Sheik, drop your speed. There's a fucking minefield directly between you and the hauler. But there was no return answer on the mic. Instead, static followed by a staggering shockwave slams into the Numina. Report, orders Ivan. The harvester's been hit. Ivan begins to utter a fresh command just as his eyes fall across the display of the CIC, and his complexion drains of all color as he watches the pulsing green icon on the fat and slow hauler change into a blood red icon marking Castile's ship as an Imperial licensed privateer. She, screams Ivan into the communication console. They've just been hit again, yells the deck officer. Drop below then and get us the fuck out of here, orders Ivan to a litany of eyes. It was too late for the harvester, however. Punching down the ship's center of mass, 20 multi-gigaton X-ray lasers spear through the old heavy's cruiser's poorly maintained bow barriers. 2 of the lasers slice clean through the ship, gutting the vessel's gravity propulsion drives, and for a brief instant, just before the gravity drives offlines, the midship's inertia sink fails, subjecting the crew in that part of the ship to an instant of all 2,390 Gs of acceleration. Metal and polymer structures instantaneously vaporize, creating a secondary force surrounding the bulkhead beams as the X-ray lasers carse through the ship's internals. The harvester's hull peels back like a tin can from the violent expansion of this metallic vapor, and secondary explosions erupt throughout the vessel as the systems fail. Driving forward, the harvester floats, a lifeless, hulking graveyard. "Coordinates, Captain." "Milstein," yells Ivan. But before the deck officer could respond, an equal laser barrage to that destroyed the harvester cars to the Numina. The blast strikes the aft section of the ship as it's desperately tried to get away, and the shockwave generated by the X-ray beams ripping, tearing, and melting its way to the ship travels outward from the bow, ripping the loose bulkheads, turning them into half-ton hypervelocity projectiles. Structural members twist and snap like trees in a cyclone. Sections of armor are torn clear of the hull, exposing compartments to the vacuums of space. In the holding cells near the far aft habitation area, a chunk of battle steel spalls loose from the armored deck, slicing a deckhand in half from his lower right abdomen to his upper left shoulder, spraying the brig with viscera as gravity throughout the vessel dies. In the midships, a fabrication machine that was ripped loose by the sudden loss of inertia sinking cuts a long series of gashes to the oxygen and hydrogen storage tanks in the cryo bay. The bay, normally drained of atmosphere in an effort to prevent explosions in the event of an accidental containment breach, instantly fills with a volatile mixture of oxygen and hydrogen waiting for a spark. Approximately 10 seconds after impact, it finds one. The center of the old vessel suddenly bulges outward, and what few bulkheads still remain in that area ripped apart as the ship is engulfed in a vast and rapidly dissipating fireball. The two halves of the ship drift apart, free from their centuries-old bond. In the bow section of the ship, Ivan comes to. As he looks around, he discovers that the entire left side of the bridge has been torn away. There's little power left and no communications. In the aft section, deep in the compartment that miraculously survived, a handful of the ship's crew and a captured merchant still live. Jason Crows, the kind crewman who was beaten for trying to befriend and free slaves, works to care for survivors, knowing full well that he may not survive once captured. "Reel in the mobiles," orders Castile. "We won't be needing any more firepower today." "Aye, sir. And let's check for survivors."
I have questions. May I,
Yeah.
may I ask?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, okay. Ivan, is he a pirate captain? Is that?
Yes.
Okay, good. I just want to orient myself. I became hooked. Not too far in, but it was a certain sentence that grabbed my attention. And I'm almost going to suggest, the sentence is, "Target has arrived." What if you were to make that the opening sentence of the story? Because now I'm put in a situation. And then you have, who says, "Have they seen us?"
Castile.
Castile. So that's the number two, the executive officer?
Yeah, that's the captain of the Albatross.
Okay, the Albatross. Okay.
The attacking ship.
Okay. But if you were to put me right away, and you could put me in the scene right away by saying, "Target has arrived," and let me stay with the protagonist. Is Captain Ivan, is he the protagonist?
Castile is the protagonist.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
Ivan and she, they're both pirate captains.
Okay. All right.
Might have been a little bit more clear if I wasn't stumbling over my words.
Who do you want to win this battle? Not the war, the battle.
It's Castile.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. Then there's lots. I like you wrapped up some danger. There's a radiation leak. We have to be concerned about that now. As a reader, I'm like, okay, what's going to happen next? So I like that. But yeah, and somebody's drinking. Who's drinking whiskey?
That was one of the pirate captains.
Okay, that makes sense. Right. Okay. Yeah. No rules on a pirate ship. Right. Okay, I like that. In fact, if I knew that they were drinking sooner, then I'd get a sense of, oh, okay, this place is a free-for-all.
Right.
What else are they going to do? We're already in a kind of a wild environment on this ship. But if you were to begin with "Target has arrived," suddenly I am in the story.
All right.
Right away. And then suddenly there's a situation, you're going to fill the details for me, I'm along for the details.
That's easy enough, yeah?
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Good luck with it.
Appreciate that.
Instead of going all the way up, I'll just announce from here. Emily Erickson, you want to go next? Thank you. Hey, grab the mic and get up here. So
I know.
Yeah. People are nervous to do that. Don't be.
Maybe not.
some poems I'm reading instead of fiction. So I gotta get them in order. Okay. This first one's called Sleepwalking. I visit you in my dreams, writing letters in my sleep. I rehearse what I wish I could say to you, silently drifting away. The gravel stuck between my tiny toes, replaced by gravel clogging my throat. I want to revisit the pretty pink roses, but the haunted house creeps its way back into the back of my head. The pleasant thoughts of what once was silently drifting away. Those thorny protective plants wilt away into nothing. All that remains is the shallow empty vase sat at the very edge of that unstable table. Even the slightest movement would send glass shooting towards that cracked floor. The house that raised me holds more ghosts in its halls than I could have ever once imagined. I blow the dust away and pray that I can magically bring these roses back to life, but instead I just watch them silently drift away. I inch down these ghostly halls hoping to run into something familiar. Instead, I'm greeted by violent demons that once tormented me with nightmares and paralyzing fear, shouting and pinching my skin, shaking me awake with their doubts and worries, reminding me of how my life would never be the same again. I chase myself through the possessed house. Mirrors crack as I make an effort to find my way out. I am trapped. I can't find the memory of how I ever escaped in the first place. I do not remember what I came here looking for in the beginning. Retracing my own ghostly trail, I step on the runes of the rose petals. Tears stain my cheeks. I make my way back to my bed, and I silently drift away. This next one is a bit shorter. It's called Choker. Born with a cord wrapped around my neck, screaming and crying, was I always just a wreck? I've thrown the cards away, I can't handle this deck. I'll go down, 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 until I finally hit the ground. I'll bury myself, you'll never hear a sound. No more yelling or dwelling, no more fear of excelling. I can't be who you think I am, I'm haunted by my own skin. My identity is unknown, my patience is wearing thin. These past 20 years or so, I don't know who I've been walking in. I'm grabbing a shovel, I'm heading out the door. I've tried thinking it out, but counseling myself has proven such a chore. I'll cut the cord I was brought here with, so I don't have to choke anymore. I have another short one before my long one. It's called Acceptance. Waves crashing into me, I'm sinking like a stone. I try to swim to shore, but I forget my way back home. I forget the feeling of comfort. Am I really this alone? A school of fish swim past me. I wonder if they know. How long have I been sinking? My thoughts begin to roam. I can't recall how I got here, but I'm stuck now. My limbs are turning into stone. I think I'll stay here a while. I'll make a home in this sea. I can't feel my fingers or toes. I guess breathing just isn't for me. My last one's a bit long. It's called After Hours. Last night after work, I dragged myself to the drugstore. Confined in that parking lot, my world began to shake. A rough week to you is not a rough week to me. Trudging under fluorescent lights as I succumb to my inner voice, walking through that aisle may seem like nothing to you, but to me it was a slow march, every wary step a cruel reminder. My eyes graze the shaving cream, whispering about that crooked reminder, how shameful that I can't do something as simple as stroll through the store. Many of you will never think twice about how you can glance at something as simple as a razor without feeling your knees shake. How you will not have venom spat at you by an invisible voice. A walk through the store to you is not a walk through the store to me. The tiny little plastic box screams at me like an angry alarm clock as a reminder to wake up, come back, creeping back into my head, that spiteful little voice, reminding me of how I once made my bedroom into my personal medical store, to pick through instruments and bandages when I had those urges I just couldn't shake. What feels like drowning in deep water to me is just a simple task to you. You probably don't think twice about these things, do you? Bottles of pills, long sleeves, shaving, all have a different meaning to me. I yearn to remove my brain, dust it off, and give it a good shake. Such simple, everyday things that I wish weren't such a harsh reminder. I am bruised by the fact that I can't even walk through a damn store without being attacked and threatened by my own voice. Now, I'm not delusional. I'm aware that most of you have your own inner voice, but I'm sure the way mine treats me is quite different than how yours speaks to you. I'm not certain how long I have been dwelling in this aisle at my local drugstore, but I long for the day that I rest my tired eyes on these simple items without them tormenting me. Clouds form in my eyes, knowing that these things will always be a reminder of the days when my storms would be so loud that my bedroom would shake. I wonder if these thoughts I will ever be able to shake. I wonder if I will ever have a more warm and kind voice. Will I ever be able to do these normal everyday things without that reminder? My past follows me everywhere, like a lost dog would follow you. These seemingly simple things to you are not so simple things to me. I wasn't ever able to pick up what I came here for. Tomorrow I'll try to go back to the drugstore. These things that make my world shake may not feel so extreme to you, but my past has stolen my voice, so please be patient with me as I fumble for a reminder that says my future may someday have something better in store. Thank you.
Emily, I really like your writing. And I love the poems.
Thank you.
Do you think about, do you have ambitions to study poetry, creative writing at the baccalaureate or graduate level by any chance?
Not really, it's more of a hobby.
A hobby? Okay, all right, yeah. I'm thinking because there's a poetry professor, well, a creative writing professor who specializes in poetry at NIU. Her name is Amy Newman, and she writes face-melting poetry. I mean, literally, it's a full figurative. But anyway, it's she really just can rip a person apart with words. And I'm reminded, you're much more of a gentle poet, if I can put it that way. But I loved also sleepwalking. And I was thinking about sleepwalking. I wondered if you can give me one thing, just one additional thing in that poem. You mentioned, this is a poem about memory, isn't it?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah. And I was thinking, one of the most powerful sensations that are associated with memory, smell is one. And then you mentioned roses. And I thought, gosh, can I smell that rose? Can you give me, what does it smell like? You know, I would say just think about that. And that it might push that poem over the edge.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Alexis, tell us next.
Okay. Everyone hear me?
Yeah.
Good, good, okay. So I'm just doing a short poem with series in it, and it's called Bored. The clock that's ticking on the wall is beginning to tick within my head. Tick tock, tick tock. My head is face down in the sheets, counting the wrinkles that lie beneath me and around the seams and in between. Tick tock, tick tock. The lifeless linen smells no longer new, but of the dust that is gathered from the months prior. Tick tock, tick tock. My sweatshirts that hang in the closet are now stiff to the touch, waiting to be worn. Tick tock, tick tock. As I watch the leaves change day by day, from my window I shall stay. Anger. The constant repetition becomes a migraine on the verge. The clock won't stop ticking. Cheeks become red and my muscles begin to ache. The sheets are in disarray that lie beneath me and around the seams and in between. The linen smells no longer of dust, but of smoldering sheets on fire. The sweatshirts that hang in the closet are now covering my floor, no longer able to be worn. The leaves are crumpled and become a dull pastel of what they once were. The clock continues to tick. From my window, I still sit. Perception. I wish I would have listened to the clock and understood. Tick tock, tick tock. The time I spent with my face down in the sheets, counting the wrinkles that lie beneath me and around the seams and in between. The linen I lied in every night kept me warm for months on end from the unwelcoming wind that rattled my room. The sweatshirts that hang in my closet untouched were once the softest thing to touch my skin. The leaves outside are telling me that time is surely moving. Tick tock, tick tock. From my window, I truly see. Intriguement. The window view has become my favorite place. It is no longer a hindrance within my schedule. The leaves outside my window are a beautiful color of green, yellow, and even orange. All of my sweatshirts are ironed and fall gracefully upon my shoulders. The linen smells fresh and bright like a freshly donned laundry load or a valley full of daisies, finally breathing in life. The dust no longer lingers, not even when my head is face down in the same sheets, counting the wrinkles that lie beneath me and around the seams and in between. The clock that once ticked upon the wall no longer ticks within my head. And that's all I have.
It's a prose poem, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah, I'm out of my depth, I can't do it.
That's like a view. Was it divine?
I have two short pieces. The first one is called Geyser, and it is a poem. The air is scorching and thick with the pungent smell of sulfur as I step along the path. Worn planking groaned beneath my feet, crying a warning to heed. Many have taken that same path before me. I continue. My eyes sting as I glance around. The air is becoming heavy on my chest. Bordering the path are acidically vibrant, bubbling pools. They hiss and pop, spitting with violent taunts. My throat gags at the acrid stench. It spreads like a disease, rotting in me. I quicken my pace. All around me rumbles and boils in anticipation. I start to run with wild eyes. I see the end. My chest heaves, lungs poisoned. I reach abrupt end of the path, body lurching forward. The air howls and taunts, pushing me closer to the edge. My mouth gapes open as I shake, ready to explode. A burst of water screams before me, popping off into the air like a firework. A geyser built up from the pressure and steam. I fall back as the water tumbles down, shower me with the sensation of release. I close my eyes as we sigh in unison, resting for now. And this is a little excerpt from my beginning of my short story called Little Mouse. The light of day slipped through the windows of a small storefront, sitting quietly on the street and tucked back, hiding away from the noise of the bustling city. Its wood cladding was coated in rich plum paint, with the door to the shop striking vermilion to complement. Inside was not as striking in color. The walls were a dark mahogany and the trim curled with intricacy. An ornate rug with splashes of green, dapples of yellow, and whispers of tan and red stretched across, almost covering the entire floor. Pale fabric mannequins stood about the shop, some wearing half-finished work, while others adorned completed lace dresses or slick suits. Next to the big shop window, a 3-paneled mirror stood where clients could check out their specially tailored clothing to ensure a good fit. From behind the front counter stepped out Alexander, the owner and sole tailor of the establishment. Alexander was short, a thin man with almost sickly pale skin. Compared to his colorful and intricate work, he was washed out, as if a ghost. His suit was quite humble for a man who could craft whatever he could desire. Alexander slipped off his tweed jacket with gloved hands, tossing it onto the chair next to him. Gently pulling down on his vest to adjust himself, He floated across the room to a cart resting next to the 3-paneled mirror. Out across the top of the cart lie the tools that could create endless possibilities. Scissors, pins, and needles, all glimmering with anticipation. Alexander slipped off his gloves, placing them on the cart. His hands had been carved with deep and jagged lines that had become silver with age. Most would assume Alexander had been injured, but these scars were cut with intention. The tailor lifted up a pair of scissors to inspect, feeling the weight in his hands. This particular pair had a symbol engraved, eerily similar to the scar on Alexander's right ring finger. Upon closer inspection, one could see that all of his tools had odd jagged carvings. Alexander gently placed the pair of scissors down with a sigh. He reached for the second pair when suddenly the shop door swung open. The bell to the door startled Alexander. His right hand had jolted as he jumped in surprise. One of the scissors had skidded across the top of the cart, teetering on the edge as if it had been startled as well. The tailor hastily put his gloves back on and smoothed his clothes in an attempt to gain composure. He turned to greet the customer in the doorway, stepping away from his quite seemingly lively objects.
So this is an excerpt, right?
I guess like beginning, yeah.
Yeah. Where do you want the story to go? I'm just curious.
Not sure yet. Just kind of something I came up with.
Because you got a protagonist,
Yes.
Alexander, right?
Yes.
He's the tailor. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Okay.
And I do have an antagonist, and I have expanded a little bit past that. And the title Little Mouse is a reference to the nickname the antagonist calls Alexander.
Oh, okay, cool. I'd love to hear more of that. What do you, next time? What do you this? Yeah, cool.
All right.
Yes, well done.
Rebecca Nelson?
This is an excerpt I have from I Love Your Brother More Than You. Grace, will you hurry up? Stefan and Damon are waiting for us. Caroline yelled downstairs as Grace got ready to go help her friends. Well, Stefan was her friend. Damon, on the other hand, she would gladly throw into the quarry in a lockbox, never to be seen again. Every time Damon was involved with a plan, things always seemed to go south. Last time Caroline ended up turning into a vampire because of Catherine. I'm coming, Care, calm down. Grace yelled down to her younger sister. Caroline becoming a vampire hadn't changed much. She was still the same impatient, spoiled girl she had always been, but you would have thought that would have changed when their parents got divorced and her dad moved out, but apparently not. No wonder Damon was attracted to her when he first met her. Grace soon came down the stairs and joined Caroline in the car, and then they were on their way to the Salvatore's boarding house to help them with another daring adventure, as they put it. Normally this type of thing they would turn to Bonnie for, but she was dealing with some personal family issues, and they all agreed that she should focus on that rather than worrying about what they were doing. To say that the Salvatore brothers were shocked to find out that the girl they had grown to know as a little sister, well, Stefan more than Damon, was a witch and a vampire, when they thought it was always impossible, would be lying. It took a while for them to re-warm up to her, but eventually they got there. While Caroline was driving, Grace found herself drifting off into a daydream. She was reliving her moments in her life that she had long forgotten about. All of a sudden, a couple memories about late nights spent with two certain vampires came up. Elijah, where are you? Grace questioned her love as she was searching around for him. Boo! Elijah's younger brother Cole jumped out and scared Grace, causing her to scream slightly. Cole, that was uncalled for. You nearly scared me to death, Grace replied as she smacked him in the arm. I am so sorry, my darling, Cole replied to Grace while grabbing her hand to kiss the back of it as he did every time he greeted her. Cole, have you seen Elijah around? He said he was going to meet me here, but he has yet to show up, she questioned the younger Michelson. Unfortunately, my darling, I have not seen my dear brother. He must be still tied up with something that Niklaus has drug him into, he replied, while watching her face closely to see whether she would be disappointed that Elijah had not shown up or if she was happy that he hadn't shown up. As much as she tried to hide it, The youngest Michelson brother had noticed her looking at him with that wild curiosity in her eyes. Oh, well, perhaps you'd like to keep me company until we hear word from Elijah? I'd be most happy to accompany you, my dear, until my brother appears, he replied smoothly to the woman in front of him. Cole and Grace walked silently throughout the garden, every now and then sneaking glances at each other. Yes, Grace loved Elijah, but there was something that caught her eye about Cole. Elijah had warned her in the past to be very cautious around Cole because there was nothing that he couldn't do. Although Grace and Cole were pretty evenly matched when it came to strength, regardless of the fact that Grace was a witch and Cole was a vampire, little did Grace know that within a few weeks she would be ripped away from both of them to a whole new country to start a whole new life. However, not before Elijah could turn her into a vampire due to thinking they could live the rest of their immortal lives together. Hey, Grace! Caroline yelled at her older sister who was intently staring out the window. What, sorry? I wasn't paying attention. I see that. Are you going to get out of the car or no? We are here. Everyone's waiting for us inside. Caroline replied to her sister, semi-annoyed that she was being ignored, as if being ignored by Tyler wasn't enough. Yeah, I'm coming, Grace replied as she was getting out of the car. Caroline walked ahead of her sister into the boarding house. Grace slowly made her way up to the door and inside, with no idea that she would soon be facing her past and it would be coming back with a vengeance.
About Grace the Witch. I'm assuming in the universe you're creating, witches have certain powers. As Grace, how old is Grace?
She is 24.
Okay, so she's become aware of her powers at this point? Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious because I would love to know what some of her powers are. You know, what can she do that, can she have some sort of mastery over the vampires in her life or you know, around her? That would be kind of interesting. Yeah, just something to think about. I would love to see some power. A display of something. Yeah, you know, turn somebody into a toad, or at least threaten. You know. Anyway, that's just my thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
Deborah?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm going to read a couple things. The first one is a scene that we had to do called Falling Sadness. Fall has come. The trees have finally divested themselves of their brilliant orange, red, and yellow clothing. Skeletal branches like gnarled fingers reach, grasping at the wind as it breathes its way in and through the boughs. A few stubborn dry leaves refuse to let go and continue to twist in the breeze. They have no desire to join their companions below. There is little left for the tree to claim as its own. The gaunt twigs and lean limbs in their state of undress signal the broken barrenness of impending winter. The quietness of this fall day is occasionally broken by the shush of dry brown leaves tumbling over each other in their attempt to escape to who knows where, to somewhere, to anywhere. They roll and topple over each other in a collective plan to break free. The wind whispers a haunting melody as it weaves itself in, around, and between trees and houses, searching for something lost while it drives the leaves on. The wind is no one's companion, but the leaves are deceived. When a fence or house or barrier hinders the leaves in their scheme to escape, they climb one over another, up and up, until they can go no further and finally lay still. The wind is no friend to them and takes them no further. There they will lay, abandoned, and there they will stay to sleep through the cold months of winter. Up and down the street, homes are beginning to light up and share shy twinkling smiles across the way to one another, then turn to embrace the life inside. Plumes of soft white smoke billow, puff, and curl their way up from chimneys that are stacked like blocks on home after home, signaling all is well inside. An abandoned house sits alone on its tiny parcel of ground and has shed all its outward attire. It has finally surrendered the last of its garments to the years of rain, and snow and wind. It stands naked, gray, weather-beaten, and defeated. The house does not invite outsiders to enter. It feels an indignant shame in its appearance and a deep, dark envy of the homes it resides amongst. The windows are broken, sullen, and angry. There are no sounds of memory left in this house. Warmth has been abandoned. No affection or fondness lives here. No plumes of soft white smoke are leaving this house. Even the lonely specters no longer inhabit this shelter. This house has seen and felt enough, so it sits and contemplates the end of its days. In the distance, lumbering low-gray clouds are plodding their way across the sky. Their fatigue is evident by their sad and sluggish movement. The sun still sleeps and refuses to awaken to break the spell of sorrow. There is no bird cry to call the sun. The stillness of fall continues to lull the sun into a languid sleep while winter sits on the doorstep waiting its time. Okay, and this one is called, it's a poem called A Dying Heartbeat. When one life lived to love in vain, and footprints ran to embrace the pain, helplessly clinging to those eyes that smile, holding on to promises made, so I stayed a while. Diamond promises sprinkled around, like crystal flakes falling on frosty ground. Trusting and taming the no in spite of the doubts, trusting instead of hearing, ignoring the shouts. How wrong, how staggeringly wrong this one, but when your heart is on fire, you choose not to run. The wrong that roils up and bubbles and oozes, it's black and treacherous, and it lands where it chooses. But there are rainbows in those eyes that smile, so I bow my head and I walk for a while, afraid to stop to know what's true, afraid to go when I finally do. Gentle hands held scarlet blossoms of delight, hands that were lovingly doing what's right. Too soon it appears it was a masquerade, and those gentle hands became a silver blade that slices through bone and flesh and tears, that steals the youth and takes the years. Hands that stole a tender beating heart, drug it through broken glass for a start, left a scarlet blossoming on a snow-white linen shirt, and left the heart to perish in the rain and in the dirt. A coppery tang arises from that little broken heart. The scarlet flows around it like a gruesome work of art. The dying heart lay beating out its final precious song, the heavenly ending music for the love that went so wrong.
It's about your scene. Is it Falling Sadness?
Yes.
Yeah. Good title. And I have a question, and I have a flash idea. Just a crazy idea.
Okay.
Who's the protagonist in this scene?
I guess that would be the fall.
Okay, that's good. You left it so general for me because I had a weird idea that I want to share with you. I'd like you to think about this.
Okay.
When you were describing the house, shedding its garments, there was a lot of time when we were describing the house as it's changing in fall and maybe it's been derelict for a while.
Mm-hmm.
What if you were to take the story, the scene, from the point of view of the house?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea.
And just kind of build that out that way. The house has a personality, and it's in a situation, it's in disrepair, and fall is very unkind to this house. And there are no people in this house yet that I've heard. It's abandoned, you said, right?
Right. We had to do a scene that had no people in it.
Yeah.
But if that would mean like moving the house to the beginning and then building everything else after that.
Yeah.
You think?
Okay.
Okay.
It's tried as an experiment, you know?
Great idea. Thank you.
Okay, good. Now, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, if you want to move the mic up, you may.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to come up here and do Anna Nicole Smith, but I'm not going to do all that. Just one, okay. So I have a short story. It's kind of more like, it's probably like the beginning of a bigger story. but it has an ending. So, Joan was uncomfortable. She already didn't like the dentist, and now she had been waiting for a solid 25 minutes without so much as a cough from the receptionist. It was just her and this kid, Arthur, that she knew from school. It wasn't a very big town, and Arthur was just one grade above her at the school. Just Joan, Arthur, and unfortunately the shitty top 20 hits from 5 years ago that was playing quietly throughout the office. Both of the mounted televisions on either side of the waiting room were off, reflecting a warped reality from the black mirror. The glass door to Joan's left was firmly shut, showing the darkening sky, horrible and bitter cold just beyond the warm and glowing waiting room. Joan glanced at her watch, 5:31. Her little sister, Frankie, had to be picked up from youth group Bible study at 6:30, and Dad wouldn't be happy if they were late for dinner. Last month, she was out way past curfew with their friends, and when Dad found out, her little brother Jamie could be such a little snitch sometimes. He went totally ballistic, talk about the spirit of the devil and her ungodly ways were all to fill the Waters house that night. Her father had just given her back the keys to her car, and she wasn't going to let Toothache fuck that up for her. Hey, do you know where the receptionist went? Asked Joan, gesturing towards the empty desk. It feels like we've been stuck in here forever. I'm really not sure. Maybe there was a tooth emergency in the back and it was all hands on deck, said Arthur. Then he laughed at his own joke, which Joan really didn't find all that funny. There hasn't been a noise or anything from the desk or from the back in a while. Arthur was wearing a green flannel and combat boots and kept messing with his hair, taking pieces and twisting them and letting them spin back into a resting position. I'm literally in such a rush, and this is not funny at all. Where is the dentist? Asked Joan, sighing loudly and putting her head in her hands. Her tooth was killing her since the car accident 3 months ago. She had hit a patch of water on the highway and slid right into a tree. If she would have hit it any differently, she probably would have died. She had done her best to hide the toothache from her family, but last night at dinner, her dad had made grilled chicken and rice. Joan bit a particularly hard piece of rice and felt a deep and sharp pain shoot up through her tooth. She couldn't hide the pain clearly plastered across her face, or the yelp of pain very easily from her father, who immediately demanded that she go to the dentist. She had begged and pleaded, insisting that she was fine and that it wasn't that serious, but her father, always a very strict, no-nonsense type, shushed her immediately and set up the appointment that night. Her father had always been very strict, but since the accident, he had become a dictator in the house. It was understandable. Joan had wrecked the car beyond repair, but living under someone's thumb was not ideal. And it's not even like the car was nice anyway. She was able to get another one with no problem, so she didn't see why it was such a big deal. Should I go say something or knock on the door? Said Arthur, who looked antsy and nervous. He gestured towards the double wooden doors by the receptionist's desk that presumably led back to the dentist's office. I'm sort of in a rush too, Arthur stumbled as he stood up, forcing Joan to stifle a laugh and turn her head. She'd seen him a few times in the hallway, and she hadn't really noticed him. She thought maybe that she'd seen him at Janice Bridges' party last weekend if she wasn't mistaken, but if she did, he had stayed in the corner all night playing chess with some other kid she didn't know. He seemed like a really nice kid at school, and if she remembered correctly, he had lost his little brother a while back. The school had everyone in their grade sign a big card for him, but she wasn't totally sure that was his brother. I'll come with. I don't want to stay alone in here. This place is super creepy, said Joan, also getting to her feet. She started after him to the front desk, which sat fully unoccupied. The receptionist was here like 30 minutes ago, right? Asked Joan, looking at Arthur curiously. Did she literally disappear? Arthur did look really familiar, but Joan wasn't completely positive where she had seen him before. It couldn't have been at Janice's party. Who would have even known there? She couldn't remember if she had ever had any classes with him, but she wasn't 99% sure. That's really weird. Maybe she got up and went to the back when we weren't looking, said Arthur, who nervously checked his watch and leaned over the counter. Or maybe there was a tornado warning, and she's hiding under the desk. Arthur laughed again at his own joke, which again, Joan didn't find all that funny. Joan was so sure she knew Arthur from something other than just the high school hallways. Whatever, said Joan, walking back to her chair and grabbing her coat, hat, and gloves. I have to go right now. I'll talk to you later, Arthur. She briskly walked to the door, braced for the cold, and opened into the icy cold Michigan wind. She half walked, half waddled to the parking lot on the side of the dentist's office. Her car sat practically abandoned in the parking lot. The only other car, a gray piece of shit, sat next to Joan's blue, slightly older piece of shit. Both were covered in fresh snowfall. Nothing like a November in the Upper Peninsula, thought Joan. She unlocked her car, put the key in the ignition, and turned it. The engine sputtered and stopped. She tried again, and nothing happened. Fuck, she thought. Can literally anything go right for me for once? She pulled out her phone and dialed her home phone number. Ring, ring. Hello, the childish voice of her sister Julian asked. Hey, Jules, can you get Dad for me? Dad's not here, he's at church. Well, if he gets back, could you tell him I need help? Sure, Joan. Okay, bye, Jules. Love you. Love you too. Well, great, Joan thought. I can't even turn on the heat. Joan sat in the cold of her car, hearing the ice-cold wind whipping for 5 minutes, before making up her mind to go back into the cryptic dentist office. As she opened the door and braced for the icy wind, her phone began to ring. She quickly shut the door and answered it, expecting the gruff but comforting voice of her father. Instead, it was an unfamiliar voice on the other end. Hi, Dad, said Joan, but she was immediately cut off. Here you are, alone, stuck with nowhere to go, said the voice in a flat, monotonous tone. You spend so much time focused on yourself that you don't notice that you're slowly killing those around you. Joan hung up immediately, terrified at what she was hearing. She opened the door and jumped out of the car and ran back to the dentist's office. She ran up to the dentist's office door, but strangely it was locked. She tried knocking, hoping to alert Arthur, but strangely Arthur was not in his seat. Looking closer, he wasn't in the waiting room at all. She hit the glass door with the side of her fist, shaking in its frame, but nothing happened at all. Harder and harder she hit the glass bouncing in its frame, but it still didn't budge. The icy wind blew fiercely against her back, and she desperately wanted to get into the strangely empty but warm and comfortable office. Joan turned around to see if there was anything to hit the door with harder, but she saw a figure, tall, big, and covered from head to toe in a black cloak, approaching from the street. Joan, not sure who this was, asked the figure, "Can you please help me? I'm trying to leave, but my car won't start." The figure, still walking towards her, said nothing. "Hello? Arthur, is that you?" yelled Joan, trying to make her voice heard over the whipping and whooping wind. The figure, now feet away, dropped his arm down, revealing a tire iron. "Oh, great, it is you. Well, I don't need my tire replaced, but I do need..." Joan was unable to finish her sentence. The man, still shrouded in a black cloak, had swung the tire iron directly into the side of Joan's head, spraying blood all over the dentist office door. The figure was standing over Joan, who had fallen on the snow and blood-covered sidewalk on her back. Joan tried to scream, but the killer knelt down and put his hand over her mouth, and Joan saw the wristwatch that Arthur checked nervously while in the waiting room on the arm that was connected to the hand being lifted, the tire arms being lifted with. Joan, desperate to survive, tried to kick and punch, but the killer had overpowered her and was pressing her arms into the ground. The last thing Joan saw was the tire iron coming down on her face, hitting her over and over and over. The end.
I just have a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
At some point, Joan asks, "Where is the dentist?"
Yeah.
And I thought, who asks that?
Yeah.
Who wants the dentist to come? Obviously, then you say she's in pain. Her tooth is killing her. And I thought, okay. And then there was a car accident. There's a lot going on right there.
Yeah.
Just in the, I'm wondering if you would consider moving that up right to the beginning. In fact, if I were playing with the story, I would be tempted to just lead with, "Where is the dentist?" Because nobody says that unless there's something really serious going on. And that, I think you would have, I mean, that's a great way to just instantly relate to grab your reader. There's something else I want you to consider. Just play with this, okay? This, I think, is a story that is begging to be told in the first person. You know, I wonder if you might want to experiment with that and see what you get.
Yeah, I thought that when I was writing it, I thought that. I was like, this would be kind of fun, like, fully from her perspective at this point. That would be kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's something to consider, but I enjoyed the story. So, yeah, thanks.
All right, we'll end with Mike agree.
All right, I'm gonna read a little piece of my my Dark Lord saga that I'm working on. So the kind of writing it in scenes as I go, and the only real context you need is that this character is a typical fantasy Dark Lord in every way except that he successfully took over the kingdom. So after a little bit of time trying to run the kingdom, he discovered that that was really, really boring and a lot harder than he thought it was going to be at first. So he decided he would try to do something else with his time, and what he landed on was adopting an orphan infant, and he's going to raise this infant as his own, as his heir, the heir to his kingdom. So that's where the kingdom, or where it starts.
So Dark Lord, he's a bad guy, more or less, right?
Yes, he's the bad guy, but he's the main character.
Gotcha. All
So
right.
we'll see how it goes. This is called The Dark Lord Becomes a Father. The Dark Lord Vermilion paced excitedly around his bedchamber. The infant was still as fast asleep in his arms. In his absence, the royal chamber had been refitted to better accommodate the new addition to the Dark Court. The Dark Lord exclaimed to Baron Adrastus, "Ah, this old crib was once mine. How different it looks after all these years." To the new heir, he said, "Here, young prince, is the cabinet where I store all my potion ingredients. One day when you're older, I'll teach you how to mix potent poisons, delightful enchantments, and many useful elixirs. He turned to Baron Adrastus. We must be sure this stays locked from now on. There will be little fingers itching to play with the shiny bottles. Baron Adrastus leaned on the doorframe. The flickering candlelight exaggerated the dark circles under his eyes. As his lord spoke, he offered feedback in the form of non-committal grunts. At last, he nodded off. Sleeping while standing was a skill he had mastered on the campaign. In these years of peace, his abilities had atrophied considerably. His knees buckled, and he awoke with a start. The Dark Lord was still bustling about the room. Adrastus stood up, and his broad frame filled most of the doorway. My lord, by my reckoning, we have no more than a few hours until dawn. May I suggest you retire and rest yourself before tomorrow's duties? I've ordered Mr. Creasy to cancel all court functions tomorrow, so I can properly welcome my new heir into the life of power and wealth he can aspire to. Wonderful, Your Majesty. Shall I call the nursemaid to tend to the child? No, Dark Lord Vermilion exclaimed. I shall tend to the child myself. There's so much he should learn that his education must begin immediately. My son shall spend every moment with me so he can learn the secrets of my dark arts. Very well, Your Majesty. Is there anything further you require? Nothing. Dark Lord Vermilion bent down to lay the sleeping child in the old crib. However, as soon as the child's head touched the bedclothes, it began to stir. Dark Lord Vermilion hunched over the crib. He patted the squirming infant and hummed soothingly. There, there, young one. Sleep for now. In the morning, your new life begins. The child managed to wiggle an arm free of the layers of cloth wrapped around it and waved a fragile fist in the air. The Dark Lord felt something deep in his spirit, a spark, dancing on the edge of his dry, crusty soul. Baron Adrastus had frozen in place, one hand on the door. Look, Adrastus, already the child refuses to be held by the shackles of social expectations. He'll grow up to be just like me. Baron Adrastus felt a chill run down his spine as the child began to wake up. Your Majesty, he began, but he was cut off by a cry from the infant, who was struggling to free the other arm. There, there, my child, the Dark Lord crooned, just the way he remembered Mrs. Agatha crooning to him so long ago. He resumed patting the child's chest, but the shallow cry turned into a forlorn howl, which was dangerously close to a desperate scream. The Dark Lord scooped the infant out of the crib and cradled it in his lanky arms. Shall I call for a nursemaid, Your Majesty? Adrastus practically shouted over the cries of the baby. No! I'll do it myself, the Dark Lord snapped. There's a strong prince. There's my little servant of darkness. What powerful lungs you have, perfect for directing your minions in the heat of battle. My lord, see if the child has messed its clothes. Perhaps that is the source of the distress. I'll run for some milk. Baron Adrastus dashed out of the door, while the Dark Lord of the Five Realms tried to unravel the mystery of infant swaddling. Adrastus stormed back into the room, but without milk. Instead, he had a handful of rags which he threw into the crib. I sent one of the guards to the kitchen for milk. He ran across the room and picked up the shallow basin of water from beside the royal bed. He really did try to walk carefully, but most of the water sloshed onto the rug, his sleeves, and his boots by the time he knelt next to the crib, holding the basin where the Dark Lord Vermilion could easily reach it. Oh, God! The Dark Lord Vermilion had finally discovered the secret to untangling the wrappings the baby wore. The horrifying smell that escaped hit him in the face like a nausea curse hurled by an expert mage. He grabbed the rags and feverishly wiped the child's hindquarters. Oh, God! Oh, God! He exclaimed again. It's getting everywhere! Pardon me, Your Majesty. Baron Adrastus leapt into action. With a sure hand, he grasped the infant's heels and held the thrashing limbs well away from the waist. With the other hand, he deftly folded the soiled rags so that the clean corner was exposed. This he dampened in the basin, and with a few gentle swipes, the royal posterior was cleaned. He quickly bundled up the soiled clothes and tossed them into a mostly empty basin. Then he stripped the blanket from the crib and rewrapped the screaming child, handing the infant to the Dark Lord, who was still too shaken to fully grasp what had happened. The child screamed. Vermilion rocked and cooed furiously in a vain attempt to calm his heir. "Your Majesty!" A young guard burst into the room, red-faced and out of breath, falling to one knee and offering a warm bottle of milk from the kitchen. Vermilion snatched it and pushed it into the infant's face. The child swatted it away and cried more insistently. Vermilion tried again more gently, and the child accepted the bottle. For a moment, there was quiet while it gulped down warm milk. "There you are, my little prince. Have as much as you like. You'll grow strong like your dark father, and in time, you will rule beside me." Vermilion laughed. Baron Adrastus noticed that his laugh was a little bit less cavernous than usual. In fact, there was a warmth in its tones that Adrastus couldn't recall ever having heard before. The Dark Lord of the Five Realms and master of the forbidden arts stared into the brown eyes of the baby. The new heir grunted and cooed contentedly. A tiny hand waved with an aimless ambition as the child drank. Plump fingers curled around the bony finger of the proud adoptive father. "Adrastus!" Vermilion snapped. The loyal baron had nodded off. "Your Majesty?" Adrastus replied, eyelids heavy with exhaustion. "See how strong my heir is already?" Vermilion performed a mock tug-of-war with the child and marveled at the resistance the tiny hand raised. "So small, so innocent, but already he shows so much—" "Adrastus! Your Majesty!" Adrastus jerked awake. "My deepest apologies, Your Majesty. Forgive me." "It is forgiven." Vermilion might have said more, but the infant in his arms swatted the not-quite-empty bottle away from its face and began to fuss and whine pitifully. Vermilion turned his attention back to the child with great concern. The child began to cry again, but less desperately than before. Vermilion held the child at arm's length for a moment and studied the struggling form. "I'm out of ideas," he said. "Hold him over your shoulder, Your Majesty, like this." Adrastus adjusted the baby's position so that he was seated upright in the crook of Vermilion's arm, resting his head on the Dark Lord's shoulder. "Now, rock him gently, Majesty." Vermilion patted his back and hummed softly. He was about to fall asleep standing up himself, now that it came to it. The child's crying calmed to fussing, and the fussing ended abruptly with a surprisingly resonant burp, after which the child's mood was much improved. "How did you know to do that?" Vermilion inquired of his oldest and only friend. "It's what my wife always does with our children after she feeds them." "Wife?" Vermilion's shock was absolute. "You have a wife? And children?" "We were married shortly after I entered Your Majesty's service, though not in a proper church ceremony." "You never mentioned your wife," the Dark Lord stated coldly. "I do mention her now and again, Your Majesty. I try not to bore Your Majesty with the details of my domestic affairs." The Dark Lord didn't have much time to ponder the implications of this revelation. The child was making its best effort to squirm out of the iron grip of its new father. The new heir no longer cried, just made the tiny noises of discovery and exertion that babies make when they're about the business of investigating their world. The Dark Lord stooped and set the child on the thick rug. The child immediately set out to explore the new terrain. "I'm failing fast, Adrastus." The Dark Lord swayed and shook himself in an effort to maintain consciousness. Adrastus did not reply. "I've been thinking, old friend," Vermilion continued contemplatively. "My brother blindly followed our father's will. For all his supposed pureness of heart, my brother became a tool to prop up the falsehoods upon which our father's rule rested." Vermilion stared out the tall Gothic window toward the east, where light began to break over the mountains. "My son will know who his father is. He will know what sins I've committed. One day, I'm sure he will hold me accountable for my evil deeds, the same way I held my father accountable for his lies. The Dark Lord looked down and saw the new heir to the known world, shoving a scrap of a mind control spell into its mouth. No! He shouted and leapt for the child, fishing the piece of parchment out of its gummy mouth with a long finger. Adrastus! Baron Adrastus jumped nearly a foot off the ground and groggily reached for his sword. Your Majesty! He called out, blinking the sleep out of his eyes and scanning the room for enemies. Down here, fool, the Dark Lord muttered. The child was crying again, scared from the shouting. Dark Lord Vermilion picked up the infant and stood wearily. I'm done for the night. Adrastus considered this an interesting choice of words, given the golden light which had begun to peek through the stone windows. The child thrashed angrily in protest at the loss of its freedom. Call for Mrs. Agatha. The child is wide awake and I'm at the end of my abilities. Yes, Your Majesty.
I was just thinking about how visual your writing is. I enjoyed the story very much. I especially like the way you put me in a scene, and everything just sort of comes to life. I could see the scene, and it just occurred to me, if you were looking for a perfect kind of physical description that would explain his arc from this warrior, this guy who's conquered a kingdom, to now a father.
Yeah.
If I were the director of the film version of this, I would have him pass by a mirror and glance at his body, or at least show us enough of his body where you get a sense of he's not as taut as as ripped as he was when he was conquering the kingdom. He's got a dad bod now.
That would be perfect.
If you could work that in, that would be awesome.
It's definitely going to end up in there. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. That's a good story.
All right, thank you everybody for coming. Creative writing class, you guys were great. That was fantastic. Special thanks to Dan Klefstad for coming all the way here. Appreciate everybody coming out. Thank you. Have a good night.
Yeah.